These two men are good men right here. Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. Come
on. State of Tel Aviv and beyond, we're back, and we're here to discuss with the great Katz two burning issues. First, we're going to talk about the appointment that was announced this morning from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the new head of Mossad to be effective in June 2025. Yaakov and I get into some of the surprising elements of the individual who has been named. And of course, we talk about the pardon. Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a formal request of President Herzog to pardon him from all of the criminal charges for which he's facing trial at the moment. So we're going to go right to it. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Thursday, December 4th, just before 3 p.m. in Israel. And thank you, Yaakov Katz, for making yourself available on such short notice for State of Tel Aviv. We have some hot issues to discuss today.
My pleasure, as always.
Great. So let's do this. Two issues that I want to unpack with you. First is the appointment that was announced this morning, I believe, by Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, telling us who will be the next director of the Mossad. David Barnea, the current head of Mossad, steps down. His term expires in June. And the Prime Minister's office surprised us with today's announcement. Tell us what you know about this new appointee and why this is an unusual appointment.
Well, just a bit of context. David Barnea, who's been the director of the Mossad for the last few years, his term and tenure is anyhow coming to an end in June. It's a 5-year term, and that's wrapping up. On the landscape, though, of security chiefs, of Israel's intelligence chiefs, Barnea is the one who still remains in his job despite October 7th and the war that has been ongoing for the last 2 years plus. Ronen Bar, head of the Shin Bet, stepped down. Herzi Halevi, head of the IDF, stepped down. Aaron Khaliva, the head of the military intelligence, stepped down. So anyone who he worked with over the last few years has been replaced. But he has stayed in his job. And one of the explanations I've actually heard from people within his close vicinity over the last few months is that the Mossad was not responsible for Gaza. The Mossad was not responsible for Hamas. This was the way that the division of responsibilities and the different areas that each organization was responsible for watching, Mossad not over Hamas. We could argue the merits of that. And therefore, Barnea was able to keep in his job and stay on and actually had some success with other issues that Israel has dealt with, whether it was the pager attack with Hezbollah, whether it was the 12-day war against Iran. The appointment needed to be coming, and Netanyahu was known to be meeting with different potential candidates. Barnea wanted someone from within the Mossad, but Netanyahu has typically often tried to, throughout his career, try to install people from the outside. And his decision and announcement today was that he was appointing General Roman Goffman, who is officially his military secretary. So it's basically the job of the top military official who sits in the prime minister's office, who's responsible for coordinating, for being the mediator between all the intelligence agencies and the military, for briefing the prime minister for any level or issue that requires the cabinet and the prime minister's involvement in military operations, etc. He's making him the head of the Mossad. And the reason that this is interesting, Vivian, is because a few months ago, he appointed David Zini as the head of the Shin Bet after Ronen Bar stepped down. David Zini was also a general in the IDF. Roman Goffman is a general.
I have to interject very briefly because, I'm biting my tongue here. That's the second time you've said that Ronen Bar, the former head of the Shin Bet, stepped down. Is that an accurate description of what happened with Ronen Bar, or was he kind of compelled to? tender his
Well, I mean, he
resignation?
was pushed out. They said they wanted
Okay.
to fire him, and it made its way, of course, like everything does, into the High Court of Justice, and it became a big issue. Ultimately, he agreed on a date at which he would end his tenure, and that kind of stopped the legal process that was moving
Right.
of whether the government could dismiss him or not. So in the end, legally speaking, he chose the date and he stepped down. I mean, Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief of staff, also was shown the door, but he
Right.
decided to announce his decision to step down before it got to the point that they were going to fire him and replace him. So sometimes it's a willing retirement. Sometimes it is here's the door, buddy. You're on your way out. You can take the high road or not. And in both cases, these two gentlemen decided to do that. But I mean, I think what we have to look at here is really an interesting question. Why would the prime minister want to appoint outsiders to lead these organizations? Now, by the way, a good argument to appoint an outsider. The Shin Bet, for example, completely failed in the run up to October 7th. Bring in fresh blood, bring in a new face, bring in someone who's not part of the institution and the organization, can look at things with a fresh set of eyes, can come at it from a critical perspective, and can potentially reform, rebuild, and reconstruct. Always a good thing. The Mossad, I would say, may be a little different because they actually are not blamed for the failures of October 7th, and they actually have some serious successes. I mentioned two of them. The beeper pager attack, the war against Hezbollah, and of course the war against Iran. Why would you want to put an outsider there, who also really has no intelligence experience? And number two is an organization that has actually performed well. And that's why I tend to think there's a bigger story here of
Exactly.
why Roman Goffman was chosen. And a few months ago, David Zini was chosen to head the Shin Bet.
So one of the issues, there are a few things I want to just kind of respond to and for you to then offer your thoughts on. We've discussed in the past the benefits, for example, of having a civilian individual or someone with a more civilian background leading the Ministry of Defense. And that discussion, of course, we got into when Yisrael Katz was appointed Minister of Defense by Benjamin Netanyahu after Yoav Gallant was fired just over a year ago, I think. I lose track sometimes. And you made a very strong case for why it's good to have potentially a civilian leading the Ministry of Defense. When I say civilian, obviously a member of the government, Yoav Gallant was as well, but his whole background had been military. Not so with Yisrael Katz. So just wanted to remind people of that because I think that Yisrael Katz's performance as Minister of Defense is something that's subject to robust discussion. But let's stay focused now on where we're at, which is the Shin Bet and the Mossad. And aside from the plaudits that you quite rightly bestow on David Barnea and the Mossad throughout his tenure, we do know that when Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to strike Doha, as he did, September 13th, I believe, was the date, and that when he made the decision to do that, David Barnea, the head of the Mossad, had said that the Mossad would not support that action. And there were a number of reasons for that. I can't imagine that resistance from David Barnea did not rankle Prime Minister Netanyahu significantly. How much do you think that might have played into the decision to bring in a, quote, outsider? And looking forward,
The issue here for Netanyahu is, I think on the one hand, there is the credit of, and there's value in an outsider, a civilian, having someone new, look at things differently, come into an organization that requires changes and being able to do that. But I think there's something else here. And this is what I was hinting at before. Goffman and Zini are both experienced IDF officers. They've been in the service for many years, 30 plus. But Goffman spent his career out in the field. He's a field officer, a decorated armored officer, what we call a Shirioner, who's the commander of the 7th Brigade, a historic, dedicated, decorated brigade that has done amazing, battles for the IDF. But he's done that from the field. He was a division commander. And then he was up for a job to play a role in a staff position in the planning
Right.
division of the IDF. And then he was taken to be the prime minister's military secretary. David Zini, also decorated officer, infantry, fought on the front lines. Amazing. Became a division commander as well, and then went on to become the head of the IDF colleges and training. And then from there, was taken to be the head of the Shin Bet. Now, why do I mention this? Because you have different types of generals who sit on what's known as the general staff. So in the US, for example, you have the Joint Chiefs, right? All the different top four-star generals. In the IDF, you have what's called the general staff, and that is all of the top officers of the IDF. So you could have someone, typically the way it works is you'll have someone who's a military secretary, like Roman Goffman, goes on to then get a fields position, become the head of the Northern Command, in charge of Lebanon, Syria, become the head of the Southern Command, Central Command, go into military intelligence, go to the IDF planning director. In other words, there are other roles to do. Gadi Eisenkot is an example. Gadi Eisenkot's former chief of staff. He served as a military secretary to a prime minister, went on to head the operations directorate, which another major general role, went on to head the Northern Command, went on to be the deputy chief of staff. In other words, you see a trajectory. There are different roles. Both Zini and Goffman did not even complete a full term in their first role within the general staff. So they're experienced field officers, right? With tactical experience, but nothing at the level of strategic kind of field experience, looking at fronts like the Northern, the Southern, the Central, whatever it might be. Goffman now has obtained some of that, definitely, working in the prime minister's office over the last couple of years, no doubt. I mean, that interaction with diplomacy and politics and intelligence and so much more, that is a real nexus of it all. But I look at it as these are generals who are low ranking, not as veteran as some of their colleagues on the general staff, and likely going to be people who, let's be honest for a moment, will look at the prime minister who has appointed them and say, this is our patron, this is the guy who put us in these jobs, and that will give him more control over these organizations. Now, it is true, Vivian, that both the Shin Bet and the Mossad do fall under the purview of the prime minister. The IDF is under the defense minister and then the entire cabinet. It is the prime minister who gives the orders to the head of the Shin Bet, gives the orders to the head of the Mossad. But I do think that there is value in having someone maybe more experienced and people who can stand up and be a little more independent. And I don't know, I have no doubt, again, let me just emphasize this once more. Zini and Goffman, decorated, sacrificed for this country, talented, smart, whatever you want to say. But there is a reason why he chose these specific individuals to go into these jobs at this moment in time.
And I want to just go back again to the point I raised about Barnea having resisted Netanyahu's plan.
The Doha strike.
Yeah, the Doha strike. Comment on that, and if and what part you think that may have played in his decision-making. I mean, he also could have extended Barnea for a year or 2 or 3 or 5.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that happen in the past, that the prime minister typically, I mean, I remember, let's not forget Meir Dagan, the legendary, mythical, almost Mossad chief, had his tenure constantly extended and extended. Yossi Cohen had his tenure extended. He could have extended Barnea. I think that, it could be that tension over Doha, although there's been tension on other issues as well. It wasn't only that. We remember, for example, Barnea was together with Ronen Bar. They were leading the hostage talks. Netanyahu moved the two of them aside and installed former Minister Ron Dermer to lead those talks on his behalf. So the bumps in the road with Barnea were not just born out of the issue with the Doha strike in September. I think that Netanyahu did not like the other candidates that were presented. I know that there were some issues with some of the deputies that had been presented. They were not considered to be material of a potential leader of the Mossad. They were much more operational people, but not believed to be ones that could potentially lead the organization. And therefore, maybe it was the right move to bring someone from the outside, but this is definitely a close confidant and a loyalist to an extent of the prime minister. And, the time will tell, obviously. I don't question, again, the integrity and the patriotism of either of these officials. I mean, here's a great example, and I was just pointing this out to someone before we jumped on this call. If you look at Eyal Zamir, right? Eyal Zamir served as the military secretary of the prime minister. He was long believed to be the candidate that Netanyahu wanted to be the chief of staff. When he finally got appointed, with STLV stepping down, and he was brought back, he had been serving as the director general of the defense ministry, a civilian role because he had retired, and was brought back to the military and was appointed chief of staff. At the ceremony, Netanyahu said, I wanted to appoint you twice. I couldn't do it, which is questionable. What does that mean? You couldn't do it, but put that aside. I wanted to appoint you twice and I couldn't do it. And now finally, the third time, that's like the charm. And he even said in Hebrew, Et hazamir higia, like the time of the mockingbird. Zamir is a mockingbird. The time of the mockingbird has come. So in other words, he celebrated the appointment. Now look at where we are right now, right? What is it? 7-8 months later. Zamir and Bibi clashing. Zamir and Katz, forget about it, right? Tension over what we should have done in Gaza, whether we should have escalated. Zamir was in favor of taking the deal and ending, not even on he wanted a stage deal. Remember back in those days when we argued about a stage deal or a comprehensive deal, he wanted the stage deal and Netanyahu was against it. There's clear tension between these two people. This was the guy that Bibi wanted. So what are we going to say? When something happens with Goffman or Zini, what are they going to say then? That these people were taken over by the deep state. It tentacles grabbed them and took over them too. I mean, I just can't have enough. I'm sorry to laugh. I just get fed up with these people who tell me, this is what we need because of the deep state. We need these people from the outside. So I said to someone, well, look at Zamir. He came from the outside. And what happened? The deep state caught him and the tentacles grabbed him, and now he's been taken over. Come on. It's not about the deep state, and it's not about the outside. It's about something much more basic. Can I have people in this office and in these roles who I, the prime minister, have more leverage, control over? I mean, that's what it is. People who will less stand against what I want. And that might be legitimate, right? At the end of the day, this is his appointment. He's the prime minister. It is a democracy. They serve the government, and they serve the state of Israel. I just think that we as people should be aware of what's happening here. That's all.
Yeah, I think that, of course, it can be legitimate, and he's the prime minister, and it's his right. It's by law to appoint the head of the Mossad. I think that, as you point out, what we're seeing is a bit of a pattern, a tendency on his part to appoint people who he thinks will be more likely to defer to his views or judgments, to submit to what he decides is the right way to go. He's not someone who welcomes different opinions.
And exactly what you were just saying of how he appoints people. It's interesting. If you look at Netanyahu's series of appointments, he doesn't have a good record at appointing people to roles. He was the one who famously appointed Roni El-Sheikh, who was the deputy head of the Shin Bet, to be the head of the police, with apparently a promise that you would become the head of the Shin Bet afterwards. It was Roni El-Sheikh, who was the police officer who opened the investigations against Netanyahu, right? He became the enemy of the state. Avichai Mandelblit, who was the former military advocate general of the IDF, was appointed by Netanyahu his cabinet secretary, a very close role. From cabinet secretary, he made him the attorney general. And it was as attorney general that Avichai Mandelblit made the decision to indict Netanyahu. If you look at the Netanyahu trials, his former chief of staff turned state's witness. The former director general of the Ministry of Communications, when Netanyahu was also that minister, turned state's witness. His former spokesperson turned state's witness. These are all very close positions of people who he appointed. So if you actually look at his appointments, from his perspective, he doesn't do such a good job, right? Nadav Argaman was an appointment that he made as the head of the Shin Bet. Look at how he speaks about him today. Yoram Cohen was the head of the Shin Bet who he appointed. Look at how he speaks about him today. Tamir Pardo was someone he appointed as the head of the Mossad. Look at how he speaks about him today. I mean, so it's very nice to say that, Netanyahu can, of course he could do, and he's the prime minister, and as long as it's legal and it passes the threshold, all good. But I think that the history or the record does show that people tend to be independent. They tend to have real integrity, and I don't doubt for a second that these two men will as well. And they will do what's right for the country before they do what's right for the prime minister. So therefore, even if he thinks he'll have that control over them, I think at the end of the day, I have no doubt in my mind that these people, I hope, will stand up. And then when there is a clash between what is right and wrong. They will do what is right for the nation, what is right for the democracy.
Amen to that. And I want to add to that not short list of individuals who used to be working very closely, used to work very closely with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and were very loyal and top notch. I want to add to that list, of course, Yossi Cohen, who has come out in recent months since his book was published, saying that in his view as well, he thinks it's time for Benjamin Netanyahu to go home and to pass over the reins and the stewardship of the country to a successor, whoever that might be. Okay, let's move now to the other topic, which has had you rather lathered up in recent days, the pardon. Prime Minister Netanyahu formally wrote to President Herzog late last week, requesting that he be pardoned from all of the criminal charges that have been brought against him, making clear as well in his written request that he will concede no measure of guilt. And that has turned into quite the spectacle. But before we go to you, Yaakov, I just want to show our viewers the fantastic clip of President Trump in the Knesset a few weeks ago when he implored Herzog personally to issue a pardon on Prime Minister Netanyahu's behalf. Let's watch this clip.
These two men are good men right here. Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. Come on. By the way, that was not in the speech, as you probably know. But I happen to like this gentleman right over here, and it just seems to make so much sense. You know, whether we like it or not, this has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. This has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that? All right, enough controversy for the day, right? Actually, I don't think it's very controversial. So, you know, I mean, I see so popular. You are a very popular man. You know why? Because you know how to win.
All right. So, I mean, a nice moment of levity in the midst of all the seriousness. But now to you for the seriousness, Yaakov. What's at stake here with this request for a pardon? And it seems to put President Herzog in a bit of a jam. How do you see it?
Well, President Herzog is definitely in something of a jam. And this will be a real test of his decision-making, of his leadership, and it will basically determine his tenure. This will be the moment that will be remembered for a 7-year tenure as president. He's supposed to end his term up in 2028. And whatever he decides here is what will be like the first line of his Wikipedia profile page in the future, because this is really a lightning rod of an issue for the entire state of Israel. This is the fault line, so-called. And I don't know what he'll decide. It seems to me that none of this would be happening. I'll go out on a limb and say, I don't think any of this would be happening if there was not some indication or a feeling by the prime minister that if he makes this request officially, the pardon will be given to him by the president. Now, what will Herzog be able to say in return or in response to that? Because he obviously is coming under great criticism from lots of this country, and definitely the opposition and the media and the people who are opposed to the prime minister. It will be, I don't know what his exact argument will be, but I do personally, at least, I believe that there is value in giving a pardon to the prime minister, right? My personal opinion is that I look at where we are as a country. And my opinion here is based on purely looking to the future. I understand that the prime minister might be guilty of corruption. I understand that he is definitely someone who is responsible for a great deal of the division and polarization in this country. He has betrayed political allies in the past. He is responsible for October 7th. I have no doubt in my mind. Much to blame for. But I want a government that can govern. I want a government in this country that can run the country and take care and tackle the real issues that we deal with. And right now, because of the trial, the opposition refuses to sit with him. And I think, and I don't know for sure, but I think that if the trial is gone, there's a chance that we can establish a government after the next election, which is coming in the next 6 to 8 months. We could establish a government that will be made up of centrist Zionist parties. Likud, Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid, Naftali Bennett's party, Blue and White of Benny Gantz, Yisrael Beitenu of Avigdor Lieberman, and not have the ultra-Orthodox and not have the far right. And this is a government that can actually get things done for the country. And by the way, I want to just add one thing because we just watched that clip of Donald Trump. Two things I'll say about Donald Trump. One is that comment that seems to be off the cuff, like just popped into his head, was definitely not the case. It was planned. Isaac Herzog knew that it was coming and knew that President Trump was going to make that remark in his speech. That's number one. So that shows the level of coordination on this issue. That's one. But two, why does Donald Trump want a pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu? Let's ask ourselves that question. Now, everyone seems to think, no, he's buddies with Bibi. He wants to help his friend. Does Donald Trump really care about his friend Benjamin Netanyahu? That's what this is about? Come on. He doesn't care about his friend. What Donald Trump wants is it's not that he wants a specific government in Israel. He wants Israel to make the moves that are needed to get the Saudi normalization. He wants Israel to make the moves that are needed to get a deal with Syria. He wants Israel to keep to the ceasefire in Gaza, to keep to the ceasefire in the north. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to be making deals. He needs a government in Israel that can work with him to make that happen. And for that government, it's not the current one, because the current one can't say, I'm committed to a two-state solution or I'm committed to a political process with the Palestinians. But a next government, after a pardon, could potentially say that. And that is what I think Donald Trump wants. So part of it is that. Part of it is, why not help my friend Bibi? But at the end, what's bigger here is how a future government, when there's no trial, could potentially assist him in getting done what he wants to get done for his legacy and for what he wants to achieve.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand this clearly because you kind of just knocked my socks off. What you're suggesting is that Donald Trump is advocating for a pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu because that will hasten the demise of the current coalition government. We'll have elections, and what Trump is banking on, according to what you just said, is that the current coalition simply won't be revived and will more than likely see a change of coalition to a centrist unity government. I got that right?
Let me ask you this. Take this scenario, Vivian.
Yes,
you got me right. I think
right.
that is definitely part of the calculation. And I'll explain to you also why again. Imagine tomorrow Bibi gets pardoned by Herzog. Now, Bibi suddenly opens up for him 2 optional governments after the next election. Now, of course, depending on the results of the election. One option is to go with the government he currently has, the Haredim and the far right, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. That's option one. But now suddenly another option has presented itself. Without the trial, why would Yair Lapid not sit with Bibi? Without the trial, why would Bennett not sit with Bibi? When the trial's off the table, how could you say Bibi's not a legitimate partner to a coalition? When there is a trial, you could say, listen, he's indicted, he's on trial. I don't think he should be leading the country. I won't sit in that government. But now it's off the table. So now that Bibi has these 2 options, and even before the election, Trump says to him, listen, Bibi, I need you to say we as the Israeli government are committed to a political peace process with the Palestinians. You don't have to say two-state solution. Just say that. Netanyahu can get up and make those comments and potentially normalize relations with Saudi.
Right.
Ben Gvir and Smotrich might pull out of his government, but Bibi will say, okay, I'll take that hit because I now have another option for a government after the next election. And I will anyhow go up in the polls after normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. So my point here is it changes everything. It changes the entire dynamic. And I'm looking at it not from, let me be very clear. Netanyahu's time has come. He should step now. It's time for him to go. There's so many reasons why. There's no one that is bigger than the fact that he is responsible for the failures that led to October 7th. Unequivocal. Full stop. He was the prime minister for most of the 15 years leading to October 7th.
Yes.
I wrote a book about it. You don't have to convince me. But when I look at the reality and I look at the polls and I look at just what I feel is what's happening in this country, there's a very good chance that he will win the next election or that he will be able to prevent any government from being formed and we will roll to a second election and maybe into a third. And therefore, for this future of this country, I want to see a government that is made up of the Zionist mainstream centrist parties that can deal with everything that we need to deal with internally and externally.
Okay, I just got to play with your theory a little more, because what you're suggesting again is that a pardon would free up the opposition leaders. So it would free up, well, Bennett's not really an opposition leader, but he kind of is. But it would free up Lapid. It would free up Lieberman. It would free up Gantz to sit with Bibi. What you're saying, nobody's going to have a legit reason. They can't say this guy's under indictment, there's a trial, this is just too much. But if I listen to you correctly, and you're saying, on the one hand, it'll pave the way for a more centrist government. On the other hand, if under Bibi's leadership there is normalization of Saudi-Israeli relations, that will only burnish his reputation. And that will harm the opposition. So why would they feed into that?
Well, no, if he gets the pardon, then he could potentially take the steps that are needed
Exactly.
to move towards Saudi normalization. The opposition definitely wants Saudi normalization. Look at that. People
Except
don't.
that if normalization happens under Benjamin Netanyahu, if he is the leader and he is the one who brings that to pass, that's going to weaken the opposition, won't it? They're walking into a trap.
It will, but listen, Vivian, it might happen anyhow. I mean, it could be that what Herzog's also after here, and I would assume that there is a larger deal that is on the table, right?
Right.
If Bibi gets pardoned and Bibi then is able to make the statements that are required for Saudi normalization, and Herzog knows in this moment in time, from talking to Bibi, from talking to Trump, that a pardon opens up that, paves the way for that to happen. Is it not the right thing? There's so much more at stake here. It's not just about the trial. We can't just be stuck on Bibi, and I know it's hard, but there's Saudi, there's the future of the country, there's the Haredi draft, there's the next government, because elections aren't in 3 years. Elections are going to be in the next 10 months. They got to be held.
Yeah, my sort of rebuttal to you is that I think that the prism through which you're analyzing the pardon and, pros, cons, should it be granted, should it not be granted, what are the considerations, is really purely a political prism. And of course, the granting of a pardon is a legal issue. I know you're not a lawyer. Well, you went to law school.
But it's not just I'll push back on that, Vivian. It's not just a political. It's not a political perspective.
Let me finish with the legal thing, because I think that my understanding, and again, I was just kind of, cutting you and me both some slack because we need it. We're not experts on the legal issues with respect to pardons. You probably know more than I do about it in Israel. But my understanding is that without any admission of guilt or remorse, that legally a pardon is simply not possible. That this would just not be consistent with Israeli law.
It's not consistent with Israeli tradition. It's not. The president has large bandwidth and authority to be able to give a pardon. Now, it's true that whenever a pardon is given, it's usually given after conviction. It's also true that the one instance that it wasn't was done by Isaac Herzog's father, Chaim Herzog, back in the 1980s after the 300 bus line affair, where Shabak officials executed Palestinian terrorists who had taken over a bus and then tried to cover it up. And he decided to pardon them prior to indictment. Here you have an unprecedented case where the trial is ongoing, and you have a case of those people, those Shabak guys, were left the Shabak. They did not get to stay inside the security agency. And here Netanyahu is not giving that. Could Herzog still give the pardon? From my understanding, he could still give the pardon. It will definitely make its way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will have to decide whether it interferes in the presidential decision. My guess is that they would not, especially if it gets the sign-off of the former Supreme Court president, Aaron Barak, who has been an advocate in the past of a potential presidential pardon, although he might want it to come with a departure from political life. And in an ideal world, a pardon would include Netanyahu saying, I'm stepping down, I'm leaving politics for good, and give me the pardon. And that would be the quid pro quo that everyone would be in favor of. The fact is that he's not willing to do that. So the question comes back to, Vivian, a very simple one. He's refusing to step down. The trial will continue. Maybe you'll have a verdict in the district court 2-3 years from now. And maybe you'll get to a final decision on the appeals that will come in the Supreme Court 6-7 years from now. So we're going to go through this for another 6-7 years. And then finally, when Bibi is 85, 86, convicted, he's going to go to jail for these trials. I mean, the country needs to move on. The country needs to be able to deal with the big issues that we have.
Explain to me, though, Yaakov, how you see your analysis as being at all legal. What's in the best interest of the country? Fine, I get that. To me, that's a political analysis. What's the legal aspect of your analysis?
So I think that, from my understanding, the president does have the authority to pardon people with a wide range of options, even in the case of no remorse, even in the case of him not stepping down. And this will definitely, either way, it'll, if he pardons him, it's going to make its way to the High Court of Justice. There will immediately be a petition. And the question will be what the court will do. I think that in this case, the court will potentially stand down and not want to interfere, understanding that this opens up a new pathway for Israel. Look, I don't know the legalities of it to the extent that I can tell you it's allowed or it's not allowed. The president wouldn't do something that's not legal. And therefore, even the consideration of it means that it definitely falls under his jurisdiction and is something that he's legally allowed, and it's under his mandate. So therefore, the question really comes down to, Vivian, what's good for Israel? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves.
And I'm going to be soliciting other opinions over the coming week or 2 or 3. Yours is very interesting. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised to hear some of what I'm hearing. But with respect to the theory you laid out and the possibility of how it might play out, I agree with you that President Trump's request to President Herzog in the Knesset did not surprise anyone. It was very well rehearsed and brilliantly executed, in fact, that request. But I've heard other theories that are equally compelling, which is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has made this request knowing it will be turned down, understanding that Herzog doesn't have the latitude that I think you perceive he does, and I'm sure others do as well. And that this is all kind of, another one of, as people refer to it here, Bibi's trickim and shtickim, his tricks and shtick, to create division, profile, to demonstrate yet again how the deep state is out to get him, no matter what. Because the posturing for his request for a pardon is pretty bellicose. There's zero contrition, as I pointed out earlier, no remorse, no admission of any guilt. And as you said, he also made clear that he will not step down. He will remain in the job. So this is unusual, the parameters that he's set out for a potential pardon.
100%. And like we've learned, and you and I have spoken about this countless times, this country never ceases to provide us with great intrigue, excitement, surprise, and suspense. And this will just be one more instance of all of that.
I know, we think we're finally catching our breath. Yaakov, I have to say, you surprised me too today. So thank you for that. It never gets old, and I'm always on my toes with you. Thank you so much for this, Yaakov. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that. We will be revisiting the pardon issue in particular in the weeks to come. It is not something that's going to be managed or handled or go away quickly. We're going to be talking about this for a few weeks to come, and I'm going to be working hard to bring you a diverse range of opinions as to whether or not it should be granted, pros and cons. Thanks so much for being here as always. For those of you who enjoy our work, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. We rely totally on our subscriber support. We are independent, and each person makes a difference. Thanks for being here.
We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here.